Thanks to the folks that showed up in Ballard and everybody that's online. I'm here to bore you for the next hour or so, talk about outboard engines. I've been working on outboards since before I could drive for sure. So my background is I'm formerly an ASC certified auto mechanic master. I have an ASC certification in diesel repair as well. I like old boats. I own a bunch of multi-hulls, a bunch of, some people don't. But we're here in Ballard. We're in my little shop connected to my house. We're going to go through a few things today. We're going to look at what to look for when buying an outboard, preferably a used outboard. If you're buying a new one, hopefully it comes with a warranty. If you're buying it used, probably not. We're going to go through some different tools, stuff that I like to carry on board, stuff that you should have extra, stuff that you should retain from your original toolkit. We're going to go through what I like to carry for spares. With me as I go cruising, this is not really sort of the racy event that some people are used to. This engine is a Mercury sail drive or sail pro, I think they call it. This is another Mercury, so this is sort of the mothership and the dinghy engine, and on purpose, they're the exact same engine, they're the exact same size. You can take one off and put the other one on if you need to. In emergency situation, they also take the same parts, the same spare parts, etc. So by design, it was kind of a good way to go. Something to think about if you're looking at having multiple engines. If you're running, say, a Farrier with a 9.9, why not have the exact same engine on the dinghy? So go through the spare parts kit that I have. I'm not going to go into probably changing oil and things like that, but we will go into a little bit around diagnostics and problems that you might see with your outboard, whether it's been sitting, whether or not you're purchasing one, some other issues you might pop up with. And then if we have time at the end, we're going to rip this apart and throw a new water pump in it, because that's probably, I would say, the most intimidating thing that you could do to one of these things. It's pretty easy to watch YouTube, pull a bolt, watch all the oil come out, put the bolt back in, and put oil back into it. You're done. Yeah, I'm not going to go through that. So we're going to try to rip the bottom end off this if we have time, if people are still interested in doing it. So if you're looking at buying a used outboard, the best time of year to buy that is after Thanksgiving and before tax day. You can get the best deal on an outboard. So I bought most of my used outboards in my lifetime, like the week of Christmas, because people are looking for cash and they're not looking to go boating the next week or two. And they're thinking, oh, when tax return comes around, I can buy a new engine. So it doesn't really matter because we're mostly buying sailboat motors, which also double as fishing kicker motors. So the market is extremely easy within that time period. When I'm looking at an outboard, I'll start basically from the bottom up and work my way through. The first thing I'm going to look at is this lower end right here in all of this area. Does it still have the fin on it or did it break off? A lot of the times an outboard will crack right here if it's had some water and it has been frozen. So you'll start to see some cracks in here. A lot of props also. This area here, if the motor sits up on a trailer or something like that, fills up with water, freezes, it will expand and crack your prop. So really taking a good look at this area, looking at all the areas where your drains are. I'll flip it over a little bit here, looking at the anode. So looking at how much deterioration has happened on the anode. So this is a new one. That's a used one. This is a very end of life one. So it kind of gives you an idea of how those deteriorate over time. So the salt water or basically the salt is eating away at this, opposing to eating away your outboard. If this is all the way gone, it's probably a good time to walk away. If the prop is cracked, it's a really good time to start thinking about the dollar signs coming off of how much that purchase is going to cost you. So you're also looking at like anywhere like your oil fills for your lower end. Is there any seeping down there? Does it look like it really has been driven out of oil as well? There's an inspection plate on here. We'll get into this and what it looks like in there when we pull the bottom end off of that. But normally if I was going to buy a motor, I'd take a look at that. Then working your way up, you want to look at the articulation. A lot of the times this pin is missing. It's not a big deal, but if you're in negotiations, there's no reason why you wouldn't try to knock off 20 or 30 bucks if it's missing the pin. Making sure that all of this actually functions going forward. And start to look at the front of the engine here. This is where your gas line connects for your, if you do have an external tank. These will break off quite often. These nipples will break off. People will trip over the gas line, things like that. They'll break. Someone will hide it like this and say, oh, everything's perfect on it, and it's not. Does it include the kill switch? Another thing that will happen on a lot of these outboards is right around here, the stress of something can come around, it'll crack the case right in here. And pretty much at that point, it's a walk away situation. Kind of play with your different gas valves, make sure that they turn pretty clear. Go through sort of your shifting. You may have to twist the prop as you shift. That's pretty normal to get it go through the transmission gears. Then basically the other thing to look at too is basically, was someone pulling directly out on this to start it, or were they pulling straight up against the transom? So a lot of times you'll see a lot of deterioration in here, as well as the cord itself will just be totally gnarly. Pull the gas cap off. Give it a nice smell. Does it smell like varnish, or does it smell like a gas station? It probably should smell like a gas station. Just look at overall the you know, if the cowling has been replaced and the bottom end is shot, there's probably a reason. Maybe this got hot and burned all the stickers off. Could be an issue. If the motor is entirely beat and your prop is brand new, there's probably a reason for that. Like, when did they hit, at what speed? You know, that kind of a thing to take a look at. So I might just ask questions. And so you pop the hood, pull this out. This motor's in really pretty good shape. And you just kind of work your way through from the front to the back. So once again, looking at any kind of damage that you might see, any amount of corrosion that's up here is super important. If you look at this engine here, you can see that like there's a lot more corrosion on this engine from salt getting in there than there is on this guy. Mostly just because I kind of beat the shit out of that one, and I kind of take care of this one as my backup. You're really looking for any kind of burnt things. Also inside the cowl hood, you should also take a look at that to see if you see any charring, any oil, anything like that. You want to articulate your throttle cable back and forth and make sure that that works clearly, clean, as well as the choke. Make sure that the choke is in actuation position. A great thing to do at this time too is, with permission, is to pull the spark plug and take a look at that. So spark plug wise, when you're looking at, I don't know how zoomy this is going to be. When you're looking at a spark plug, you're looking at not this guy that hangs over the top, not this center point, but this inside bit right here. And what you're looking for is, you're looking for that, basically that hot chocolate brown in there is the perfect look. Brand new look is like this. Burnt is flaky white. And then basically saturated with too much fuel is black. Which I had a better situation. These aren't really all that black, are they? That one's probably the worst one. Maybe a little bit too rich on that guy there. So you can kind of see the difference in those plugs. So take a look at the plug. If you're pretty serious about the motor, a good thing to also ask before you show up to look at the engine is to ask them to make sure that it's cold when you get there. So showing up with a hot engine is a telltale sign that it's a motherfucker to start. Yeah. Like, you're gonna sit there and pull it, and a guy sat there and pulled it for like 20 minutes, got it running, got it warmed up. So when you get there, it becomes that one pole motor that you want, and you go home and it's the boat anchor that you didn't want to buy. So good way to go with you know, if you want to get serious, you're paying real money, would be a compression check, which goes into the spark plug hole. You're looking for basically anything at about 85 or higher. If you're running multiple cylinders, you want both those cylinders to be somewhat even.
Is that something you can do by yourself, or is it a two-person operation?
If you have a push in like this, it's a 2-person. If you have a screw in, it's like fitting like the rest of these. This just screws directly into the spark plug hole. So it just threads right in.
Different size spark plug holes.
Different size holes, different size adapters. You can get a good enough one at Harbor Freight for $20 with screw and adapters. So it may save you hundreds in the future. For me, I don't walk away from an engine even if it's low. But what you can do is if it is really low, you can squirt some oil in there, pull it again. If it comes up, then you have a problem with the rings.
In there, you mean in the spark?
In the spark plug hole,
Like just like regular motor oil.
like motor oil. Because what that's going to do is it's going to seal the rings at the base and your compression will come up. If it doesn't come up, most likely it needs a head gasket. And the head gasket is not that difficult to do if it's not all corroded. So it's not that big of an issue. And it's basically, this probably what happened was someone let the water pump go, it ran hot, it blew a head gasket, or could be another issue in there. But it's probably not, I mean, if you could get the motor, say for a quarter of the price, it might be worth, you know, spending $20 on a head gasket and going for it. The other thing to look at when you're in here futzing around is any rounded off screws and bolts. Who's been working on this and what's been taken apart in the past? What's cool about these Evinrudes, the Yamahas are the same way as they paint everything. So once you pull something apart, you know it's been apart. So it's a telltale sign that something's been going on in there. You want to take a look at the carburetor and just look for any kind of leakage. The fuel pump's on this side. So if you see anything leaking here, anything in the carburetor. It was Christmas Eve. I was in West Seattle looking at a Yamaha, as I do. And the guy's like, firm on price. And it was already still dirt low. And I show up and we started up. And then gas just starts pouring out of the engine. Like it started up, it ran, it throttled up good, it sounded good, compression was fine. And the guy was just like, oh no, I'll give it to you for half price. And I was like, it's already low, I can't even take it for half price. So I gave him like 3/4 price because I felt like he was getting such a bad deal already. And it took me 5 minutes to pull the carburetor apart, put it back together, and it was fixed. So you know, save me $300 for a 10-minute part, 10-minute project.
What was the problem?
We'll get to that when we get to carburetors. Yeah, we get to carburetors. But overall, yeah, you want to check that out, check the shift out, all that, and just your basic visual inspection, and then you want it to start. And if it's not spitting water out, I would walk away.
Mm-hmm.
If they've been running it without water going through it, it's an issue. If it starts up, no water spitting out, and you take a little toothpick at the bottom and it just had a piece of salt, or I've seen like spider webs, I've seen a wasp nest like started underneath something to where it's stopping the water flow. So if it has water flow, if that happens, it's just that the telltale that the water pump is working is not telling you that it's working. But you definitely want to walk away if that water pump has not been working. Yeah, that's about what I would look at when I was buying some sort of used outboard. Of course, you want to take a look at the oil. If the oil's low, probably walk away if you've been running it that way. You can do this and shine a light on it with your phone or whatever. If you start to see some glitter in there, probably not a good sign. There's definitely some metal hitting metal in there that shouldn't be happening. If the oil's super black, means someone really hasn't been maintaining it, but sometimes having an engine that's been used more often is sometimes better than one that hasn't been used that much, that's been sitting around for a long, long time. Yeah. That's what I would look for used engines. They're all a little bit different, but they're all pretty much the same. Variation between 4-stroke, 2-stroke. I think it's 2-strokes are a little bit more critical because you get some knuckleheads in there mixing gas and oil together. And if the ratios weren't right, it's just not getting enough lubrication. So it's a little bit more risky. Also, when you start it, it's going to smoke anyway. So you can't tell if something's burning that shouldn't be burning, that kind of a thing. But you should be able to see quite a bit of power coming out of that. Yeah. So that's what I got on motors, buying motors. Great. Tools. So I carry a pretty big toolkit with me because I like to do a lot of stuff, and it seems like I don't want to wait to get back to port to fix something. These toolkits that come with the engine, if you do get one, if you're buying a used one, or if you just misplace it or whatever, take note at what's going on inside the toolkit that they provide. Take a note at what size the screwdrivers are that they're providing. So these are number 2s. There's a number 10, a 13, a 17, a little bar, which is the driver for those, some pliers, and then the driver head. I've had a couple of engines that have like really funky, weird sizes of things on them. So like a 9mm and 11mm, or something that you normally don't have. So if it comes in your engine kit, I would add it to your normal toolbox if you don't already have that size. This is pretty standard. The one thing that you always probably should keep from your toolkit is the guy that does your prop, so whatever that is, and then whatever fits in your spark plug. And the reason why I recommend keeping the spark plugs is sometimes these are designed to where you can get no other tool than the one that they provided in to get that spark plug out, because they're underneath a cowl, behind a hose, and a water pump's in the way. It's just kind of crazy. So your stock toolkit is 99% garbage and 1% good. And that 1% can really piss you off if you really need to get that plug out and you're there with like 5 swivels and snapping pliers and things like that. The other thing to look at is the spares that they give you. This is a spare kit for a Mercury. It does have this size cotter key, which you cannot find anywhere else except for Mercury. And if you don't get this size cotter key, you cannot get it back in on the shaft for the prop. So, keep that in mind. And if that's something that you want to keep in your spares, that's probably a pretty good idea too. The toolkits, like I said, most of it garbage. Spark plug puller, that's kind of the main takeaway from that. Let's go into some of the spares that I carry with me. This is my little spares box. If you guys can see this okay on the zoomer. So this is where all this junk goes into it. So I have the Mercury, I have the model number, I have the serial numbers written down with me on the boat. So if someone steals your outboard, you can go to your spares box and you can find that serial number, opposing to going through your phone and different things like that. Another thing with serial numbers I forgot to mention when you're buying an outboard is I'll write down the serial number, I'll sign it, I'll have the seller sign it, and then I take a photo of their license. Some people hate that, but I'm not going to buy it unless I get a photo of their driver's license. Outboards are pretty liquid. They can come off pretty easy. I know that I think it was 2-3 years ago, the entire dry storage, sorry, Paul, the entire dry storage at Shoal, boom, motor's gone.
Yep.
They found like part of them in Idaho. Like there was somebody that stole a whole bunch of them and ended up with a van of them in Idaho. And then people were buying motors here, and then they found out they're all from Sandpoint, Idaho. So they're selling motors here and they're selling motors there. So having some proof of how to take back at least one, you might not get it back out of the fully motor and get it back to the original owner, but at least you're not going to go to jail from it. Okay. So track your serial number with you somewhere on your boat. Get an idea. This is my little guy that I like for sprung down at Ballard Marine. This is Dale. I've been using him for years. And it's more expensive. It's you know, say $2-3 per part more expensive to buy from Ballard Marine than it is to go to Amazon. But I can't call Jeff Bezos when I'm in Friday Harbor and say, hey, I can't find this part on Amazon. Can you ship it to me? Or, hey, my motor's doing this really weird screwed up thing. What do you think it is? Because he's been working on these for 45 years. So he'll say, oh, hey, Dan, how are you? Because I have this relationship with him by buying these things locally from him. So something to think about too when you're sourcing your parts and building out your kit. So what I do with my kit is I have all these parts and all the part numbers listed out per motor. There's very few variations between the two. The carb kit's different just because they're different model years. And then the fuel filters that I run are different because one has controls in the cockpit that runs through cables and the other filler. So that's really the two big variations with those motors. So as I start to do my maintenance on my outboards, I'll pull from my kit and then replace those parts. So always sort of a first in, first out, keep things fresh kind of a situation. So with me, I carry fuel filters, a carb kit, a water separator, which will go into different types of fuel filters here in a second, a water pump housing, which is a little bit overkill. But if you do burn up your impeller inside of your water pump, the housing is most likely to get shot and will kill your day. Anodes, these little disposable guys we talked about earlier, oil, an oil seal for the drain plugs on both the lower end and the upper end, and then some gear oil. So not a lot. And then additional to that, I also have some additional hose. I carry some barbs to extend hoses in case I have some kind of chafe that happens through the hoses, something like that, or you have to build a weird hose that goes around something, or you can splice the original hose if you have a problem. A little bit of baling wire in there makes any size hose clamp that you need. So a little 316 baling wire, same stuff that you would mouse your rigging with. This is some of the other stuff. This is like my tiller pilot and some other bits for, I have a system on the mothership that ties the outboard to the rudder so that the outboard steers with it. So just some spare parts around that. So I just kind of call those outboard parts. Some hose, because I have two outboards that are identical. They both have different props on them. One is a little bit lower torque and one is a little bit faster for the dinghy. And then I carry a spare prop that's directly between those two. So it could really go on either one. The way a prop is measured is there's a first number and a second number. And what's important is that second number is this 7.8 by 8. So the 8 is, if you had a 1 foot block of Jello, it would take 8 turns to go through that block of Jello. So if it's going to take 16 turns, it's going to go really fast. If it's going to take 4 turns, it's going to go really, really slow, right? So it's basically changing the torque that you have on that engine. So if your boat is slow, fast, you can start to play around with props before you need to start messing around with anything else. So in between props, then fuel filters. Let's talk about fuel filters. So this is a standard stock Mercury fuel filter. They cost you about $16. It is very hard to tell if anything's wrong with it. This is a comparable size, could probably shoehorn it in there, filter from Seattle Cycle Center for $2.99. So this is awesome. This is like a perfect replacement to the stock item. So I don't use these. I use these for the internal filters. You can start to add more external filters if you'd like. This is your standard import auto filter. This is, standard classic Volkswagen, which they made a gazillion billion of them. These are like 99 cents at Bow Wow or whatever. Or you can go a little bit more high tech. So this is what I have on the main boat. This one is for my dinghy, which I haven't mounted yet. And this is both a filter and a water separator. And basically, water is more dense than fuel. So the fuel will float on top of the water. So you'll start to see in here, you'll see a line of clear and then some fuel. And then you just crack the bottom in a sustainable way to get rid of sort of the muddy water out of the base and make sure that you don't get any water into your system. So this is a pretty good way to go. You can buy this whole housing unit, cobble it together with some other parts, but you can get this whole housing, the filters, everything at Fisheries for about $60. If you're running one of these, this looks like this forever. Like you just do not get any sediment that's coming through this micron into this screen filter. And that is about it for spares. Oh, I do carry this because they're good for stress too. They're good for stress. Couple of pull cords. I have those pull cords. I would probably never use that because I have so much like NWMA and other stuff on board that most likely I would replace it with something a little bit stouter than like I'd rather use that in my mantle for my gas light or something like that. So okay, so that is it for spare parts that I carry, and of course spark plugs, all the other stuff that's on there. Let's talk about having some engine issues. There's only a few things that really happen with these outboards. Most of the time you find an outboard and it won't start, it's because it's been sitting. And if it's been sitting, the fuel that's in there is usually bad, and as that fuel evaporates, it leaves a sediment or varnish across everything inside of the carburetor. That's probably the most common problem that you'll see with any of these outboards if you're running water through them. If you run it out of water, you're gonna have a whole other mess of issues. It's time to start looking for new outboard. So carburetors, and some people are really intimidated about carburetors, and for people that don't know engines so well, this is the carburetor. Air comes in, it mixes with fuel, it goes in here, boom, gets compressed, a sparking bolt lights it on fire and moves that piston in, and then the whole thing happens again in 4 continuous actions. So the carburetor is just mixing fuel and air together at the right ratio to get in, and you change that ratio throughout the different temperatures of the engine running by controlling the choke. So by pulling out the choke, you're restricting the amount of air and you're increasing the amount of fuel. So you're changing the dynamic there. So if you're looking at issues that you're having with your spark plug and it's misfiring and running poorly, most likely that's happening because your plug is fouled, and your plug is fouled most likely because your choke is not opening all the way. So you're starting to get too much fuel in there. The other problem that you see is that you're not getting enough fuel in there and it's getting too hot. So your ratio is then too lean. So with too much fuel, it's rich. With not enough fuel, it's lean. So when you're running lean, there's these tiny, tiny little parts inside these carburetors, but you're not even gonna be able to see. I mean, you'll be able to see that this tiny little pinhole in there has become fouled. Did it work?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that worked. Awesome. That's great. So within the carburetor, once you pull the carburetor off, they're quite simple little mechanisms. So you pull the carburetor off, you pull the top housing off, and these little jets are just inside here, like that. And you use your little number 2 standard screwdriver, and you take this guy out and you soak it in some carburetor cleaner. Use your little canned air and you just blow it out, blow it out, blow it out. Soak all your parts, and basically you put it back together, and it's probably going to be perfect. It's unbelievable how well that they work. To answer Jeff's question, what was wrong with that outboard, that Yamaha that I looked at on Christmas Eve? So if you ever had the back of a toilet apart, the carburetor works almost the exact same way. So you have the little plunger that goes down the flaps, and then it has a lift, comes up when it flushes, and it comes down and it closes that flap. So it's working the same way. So this is basically a tiny little toilet tank. So within that toilet tank, you want it to be perfectly full with water and stop at a certain point, just like your toilet tank with the float in there. If it doesn't stop and that float stays at the bottom, it's going to gush fuel over the side of the tank. So it's working the exact same way. So the carburetor, if it's dumping fuel out of it,
your float sunk. So this is actually called a float, just like you would have in your toilet tank. Within that float, it has a needle here. That little needle goes into a little seat here inside the carburetor. And you'll see sometimes that there'll be gum on there, or this little bit here is rubberized on this particular one. I don't know who made this, Delardo on the Cooney or somebody. So this little tip here will get either fall apart, come off, something like that. Someone put too much starting fluid in there and it melted it, or some other type of chemical when they're trying to start the engine. So that basically just goes back like that. There's a little pin. These gloves are too big. They're hard to get. Little pin. Just slide the other way. Pin through that way. Get our jet back in. For some reason, every time I do this, I have that stupid Benny and the Jets song stuck in my head. Benny. All right.
Dan, is that float valve, is that captured? In other words, if you take the float out, will that float pin fall out? Easy
Yeah.
thing to lose.
So if you can see this, it slides into a little retention here. So it's got a little U shape.
Yeah, I was just telling some people, that older carburetors, they're not captured, and that thing is easy to lose, and then you're screwed.
Yeah, they're not captured. So there's this little hook shape here. And then this needle just kind of sits in there like that.
Yep.
And then you have to kind of be cautious to make sure that it stays retained in that little U hook when it goes back into the unit. Because if that falls out, then you're basically SOL at that point as well. This one back together. Okay, so I pulled these two different carburetors apart for a reason. One is that this has one jet. And this is probably pretty common with an outboard. You start to get into some of the two-cylinder outboards, they're going to have a little bit more complicated jet system. And basically, there's three jets inside of this carburetor. There's a idle jet, a low-speed jet, and a high-speed jet. So they all look very different. And I thought it was pretty interesting. I pulled this one apart and I ran a light through it, and this idle jet is plugged. So this thing would be really hard to start unless you're about 3/4 throttle open, because you're not getting any fuel into the system out of the float bowl with this carburetor. So you have one jet and then a second jet, which is your mid-range this point, and then you have your big jet for full throttle. And
Is it typical to have three, or is that like it's always three?
it will usually be 1, 2, or 3.
Oh.
On most outboards, it's going to be 1, sometimes 2, rarely 3. So this is sort of a performance carburetor. So this is sort of like a racy thing. So not super common to be showing this, but just to show you that there are different types of configurations inside. And basically, you want to pull all 3 of those, soak them, blow them out. Be really cautious about poking anything in there. Because you might change the dimension, because the material itself is super soft. It's just a really soft brass. And if you're poking a stainless steel wire or pick through there, you might change that dimension. You're going to change the way it runs, and it may run a little bit rich, which is not ideal. But most of your problems are going to come from your carburation setup for runnability and problems that you'll see.
What's your favorite tool for poking out holes?
Ultrasonic cleaner.
Oh, so you don't stick anything in there at all?
Yeah, so you can get one. I used to have one. It disappeared with someone else. Long story, but I think you get one at Harbor Freight for $50 or something like that. And it's basically just a solution that goes in there, and it puts the frequency out. It's kind of high pitched and weird. And the ultrasonic will break apart all the little bits, and you just blow it clean, and it's ready to go. That's my favorite way to do it.
So what parts to the spares kit or the rebuild kit include?
Oh, the rebuild kit. This is the rebuild kit for these doggers here. Within that, you're gonna find gaskets. You're not gonna find jets. You'll find this is a whole new float that's in here. So if you think about it, this float is hollow, and this could get punctured. I've seen that happen. There are other plastic. Some of the older ones are soldered together pieces of tin. So they're pressed tin that are put together. They solder around the outside, and sometimes that solder just deteriorates, and then they get filled up with gas and they sink, and then it becomes that overflowing toilet thing. Just other bits that are in there. Probably has a new pin for this pivot, and a few other things. There's not much in these kits. Like I think this kit was like $17. This isn't like a big pricey item for us. Yeah, I think that's probably good about what I want to cover on carburetors. Most of the time, if you can get away with, like, if I always think with outboards and what we're trying to do with them, like if it's not stock, it don't rock, you know. So don't take a 4-horse and a 6-horse carburetor fits on it, and that's the only difference between the 4 and 6. That's bullshit. There's a lot of differences. There's different tuning that they do with those. There's maybe a different, ratio or pistons that are in there, rings. Just to say, like, well, the manufacturer did this just to tune it down. It's usually not the best thing to go playing around with unless you have a whole bunch of time to work on engines and not enough time to go sailing, which I'm in the opposite situation. So yeah, that's it. And you just want to make sure that you get everything good and sealed back up. So we'll get into a little bit of maintenance stuff.
Hey, Dan.
Yeah.
I just want to mention that I've fixed a lot of carburetors just using without a carb kit, just reassembling with the old gaskets if you're careful taking them apart, and they work just fine. So out in the field, don't be afraid. You can do that. I wouldn't do it over the water. I'd probably take it ashore, put a tarp under it, and work on it.
Yeah, for sure. And then get a beer flat or a tub or something when you're on your boat, because those little bits sometimes there'll be like a spring behind something that will fly across and you'll lose it. But absolutely, you're dead on. Where I would not crack open that carburetor kit unless I found a sunk float or I tore a gasket pulling it apart. Like, I would reuse everything that I possibly could. They'll last many pull aparts, put back together before you see any wear or tear. So that's a really great comment.
And the other comment I have is that I have lots of different sizes of wire, and to clean out those orifices, I have brass wire. So that's going to do better than stainless if you want to clean those out.
Yeah, for sure. Like a brass brush or something like that. Just one fine wire off of that would be good. I'm a big advocate of letting it soak until it mostly comes off. One of the issues with the buildup that you see in a lot of the motors, it's a residue from the ethanol as well. So buying pump gas and not gas at the fuel dock or ethanol-free gasoline will add to the amount of work that you're doing to your outboard. So once again, if you want to save $5 to work on your outboard more, have at it. I'm a fan of, there's a couple places in Seattle. There's Spirit down in Ballard. There's another one up on Magnolia in the village there. I think there's a couple more. There's an app for ethanol-free gasoline as well, so you can find it. But I think trying to save $10 by going to your standard Arco is probably not your best bet. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to do if you're going to burn it all out. Like if you're going to go through tons of gas all the time and you have a fishing boat or something like that, and you're running it every weekend for the whole season, you could save a few bucks at the pump. But if you're getting out of the dock and cranking up the mainsail and rolling out a jib, I don't see a point. and having to rebuild your carburetor once a season. It's just probably not worth it. And there is no filter for that. There's no extra filter you can put on to make that happen. Okay, let's talk about some different stuff that I use. I am a huge fan of anti-seize on everything when it goes back together all the time. My favorite stuff is this this anti-seize 13. It's gold, so it also is more fancy than silver by far. It comes in a bigger thing. It stays like sealed, which is better than this, which you get into sort of the holes and the crannies. I put this on everything. It's great on the spark plug threads. It's great on every nut and bolt that you put back together. Any other surfaces where you really want some lubrication. I'm a big fan of this standard white lithium grease. This can is probably over a year old. I mean, it lasts forever. I think it's probably $4. Little acid brush through the top. Good shop tool for you. Silicone grease. Anything that you're using for electronics. I'm not a fan of this stuff, which came from Do It Best. So probably your standard Ace hardware. The little tube stuff is a little bit thicker in viscosity. So it's a little bit better. So this would go on your spark plug boots, anywhere where you disconnect and reconnect electrical connectors. This one has a little stator on it to supposedly recharge the batteries at a gazillionth of a watt per hour. WD-40 is a great one if you are not going to use the engine for a while, things like that. I'll put a little bit inside of the cylinder itself to kind of fog the engine. Also, when I'm done with all of my maintenance, I do pretty much the whole thing. Where it needs to get burned off, it will burn off, but it gives it just a little, like, anything you can do to keep corrosion away is kind of your friend.
So do you like that better than like the engine fogging stuff, or is it the same stuff?
Do you know what WD-40 is?
Yeah, it's an anti-water.
It's
water
fish oil.
Is that really true though?
It's true.
Is that true?
It's fish
I'm
oil.
gonna audit that.
Yeah, if you look that up. I put it on.
Doesn't smell very fishy.
I put it on my halibut gear. That's how I get my halibut.
Wasn't it developed for this, to put on rockets, keep them from?
I don't know what it was developed for. That's your pay grade. That's not mine. If you do get stuff that's frozen, don't force it. PB Blaster is definitely a classic, and this does not penetrate. This penetrates. This just kind of coats and protects. Really, you're not going to get anything from WD-40. What you get with the PB Blaster just comes up, and it's like, this is going to be illegal at some point. It's like ridiculously hazardous. Standard grease. So these engines for maintenance, they have several points on them of Zerk fittings. So just like a little grease gun. So this guy goes here and squeezes out, and then you'll start to see the grease push out there. I think this is actually empty. So, but to have around. If you're super cheap and poor, this is one of my favorite tools. This is a spark plug sandblaster. So you can refresh your spark plugs on the go. So you just hook air into it, little button here. This bag's full of sand, and you pull the plug out and it looks brand new. If you do have a foul plug or you're having a hard time reading a plug, it's kind of a nice tool to have around to just run a couple through this, and then you can test the same plug several times. So spark plug sandblaster.
Can I ask you a question about bolts real quick? So, say you did take the bottom end off, you did the water pump. Like, are there torque? Like, do you just worry about the tension? How tight you crank the bolts back on?
I'm a fan of torque wrenches. Yeah.
Okay. So there are some torque settings or whatever you need to kind of.
Yeah. There's charts that talk about, and there might be one up here. There's not. Okay. There's a chart that talks about the size of the bolt, which isn't the head size. So like a 10 millimeter is actually a 6, right? So it's a 6 millimeter thread that's going in. And there's a pitch, which is usually like 1.0 or something like that. That's millimeters per. And then the type of material that's going into, which
would be aluminum, magnesium, steel, stainless, etc., or another similar nut material. And then it gives you what your torque should be on those types of fasteners. You can just go and say, okay, this is 10 millimeters going into aluminum. It should be 14 foot-pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you never use Loctite on anything in these, or do you use Loctite on some stuff?
I don't use any Loctite on outboards.
Yeah.
I use it on this little bit, just because it will never come off, kind of a thing ever. There's no reason to ever take that off. And then this broke, and then I had to take it off. We had to torch it off. Yeah.
What about a tough gel?
Tough gel. Tough gel's an interesting one. So it is, tough gel is for, if people don't know, it's to put dissimilar metals together. But really what the tough gel is creating is a gasket barrier, and it's not really going to create that much of a difference on your threads. Like you're going to be way better off with anti-seize than you would with tough gel. But that's what someone told me. So you can Google that one too, Jeff.
Okay. I'll just fact check later. Yeah.
Forget this will be fact check. It's being recorded. So how are we doing on time? How's everybody doing?
Pretty good, I think.
Here we go. Should we pull the bottom end off this?
Yes. Yes. Hold on.
We-
All right.
That's the exciting part we all showed up for.
Yeah.
It's time.
Okay. So
Hey, Dan, do you want to talk about oil, draining the oil and replacing oil as far as what's the fill, what's the site deal? Or did you already talk about that?
I did not. Okay. Bye guys. Good to see you. These motors do not have sights on them. These ones, so a little hard to talk about it, but yeah, some engines will have a little clear scope glass on the side, and there'll be a line on there, and you can see whether or not the oil is filled or not, and also you can kind of look at the condition of that. It's really good to take a look at the owner's manual if you do use that, because there's a variation in where that oil level is at based on the temperature of the engine. So some engines will be check this sight glass while it's cold, some will be check it while it's hot. I have a Yamaha DRZ dual sport motorcycle, and that requires you to run it specifically for 15 minutes, shut it off, wait 4 minutes, and then have it level, and then have a friend check it. Like it's like kind of ridiculous. So I would refer to the manual for that in a sight class. As far as like, if you're going to do an oil change on the outboard, there is for these small outboards, there is a million, like, I'm a bit hillbilly myself, so I can say this. There's a whole bunch of hillbilly guys out there with fishing boats that have these small outboards that are doing YouTube videos on how to change oil, but don't just watch one if you're going to refer to that guy. Refer to the manual, refer to maybe multiple videos, because some of those guys really don't actually know what they're doing exactly. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered it, but yeah, you don't.
I was thinking more of the gear oil, because there's two holes, one to fill, one to see how far it
Oh,
fills.
yeah.
And it's hard, gear oil is always, for me, it's hard to do. Do you have any tips for gear? Because you're supposed to put it in from the bottom, but yet you pull the little thing out, and by the time you get the screw plug in there, it's like half empty already.
I put it in from the top.
You
I
do?
measure it out. Yeah.
Oh, you measure it.
So I measure it. So I do have a, use your standard.
And back to the butter.
Yeah, I just use a standard Pyrex from the good old thrift store.
I can pull that out of the kitchen.
Yeah, yeah. Spouses, partners, they love that kind of thing. Yeah, it's
You
great.
can only do it once, though.
Yeah. Just once. Yeah.
But yeah, I load it from the top. It's interesting to talk about too. So if you're looking at measuring that fluid level, what works really good is just a piece of weed eater string
Oh,
that you can dip down in there. You can see kind of, I don't know if you can see my hand here, but basically you pull the dude, in the down position, and you take your weed eater string and you put your finger right up to it. Then you don't move it. So when you pull the weed eater string out, you can see how far down that fluid level is. And basically you want it
almost filled up to where it's running out anyway.
Yeah, that's good too.
So you can squeeze it out, and if you don't think it's there, you can run it for a minute. You can pull that plug out one more time and then do the weed eater string trick, and it works pretty good. It's a nice soft piece of plastic that goes in there. Yeah, okay. Let's get this thing apart. I'm gonna turn off the heater because the noise might screw up the. All right, this is a plug that I pulled for purchase inspection, is right here. Oops. And this plug, if you can see it, is the shift shaft. So all the little outboards are a little bit different, but up here you can see the shift shaft comes through and it connects to the lower end there. So if I go through the shift cycle, you should be able to see that move.
Yep, showing up on video too.
And what you don't want is that guy to be super corroded. Meaning this thing probably filled up with water or it's just really gnarly in there. So it's something you want to check out when you're purchasing a motor. So this particular, these Mercuries, to get to that bolt that's in there, they have to be put into reverse. And what I like to do is I like to look at the motor and make sure that this is kind of in this same position here. Because if I go to neutral and then forward, you can see what's happening with this guy. It's a little bit different if you put the plate down. So we're going to go straight up vertical. So there's neutral, reverse, and forward. So I know that neutral is there and reverse is there. And I may even take a measurement of that if I possibly can, one way or the other, to make sure that we put this lower end back on, that we get it in the same position. So we're currently in reverse. It's a 10 millimeter.
You find the magnets kind of handy.
Yeah, for sure. Of course, it's not going to be magnetic. Okay. That guy's free, so we're good there. We got 110 here.
I guess it wouldn't be magnetic, right? Stainless, makes sense. So, and then while you're doing that, it's another question. If this would be a long shaft,
This is a long shaft, yes.
but wouldn't, like, some of them seem to have like two, like there's a spacer, right?
Yeah,
So if you just take the bottom one off? Or like?
yeah, absolutely. And what you'll find is that bolt usually goes all the way through that extension.
Okay,
So like the older Evan roots, you could stack the extensions. You could have an engine that was like 6 feet tall, which is super funny. So just kind of like, you know,
okay.
that'd be connected together, but it's
Making my video shaker.
they were really common on some of the early multi-hulls to get them down low enough so they wouldn't cavitate.
I could use another 2 or 3 inches on my plot. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's get one here. All right, it's a little bit of
Corrosion on that
corrosion on that guy, so we're gonna clean that up before it goes back together. It looks like I can already see it starting to separate here. And we pull this apart, there's going to be a little tube for the water pump. There's going to be the shaft that drives it. And then there's also going to be that whole shift shaft that's going to come out. You want to make sure that nothing really comes apart when we do it. So I'm going to do a little tweak there, a little shake, rattle and roll. All right, there we go. Come down.
right. That's our guy right there. So we got our ship shaft. This is our water pickup. So water gets picked up here. This shaft is driving the water pump. The water is being pulled through here into the water pump and then up into this here, which if you look in here, Paul, this tube is the tube that's going up into the water jacket, going around the engine and then coming out the tail, which you'll see out the back.
So when it's in there, that rubber seal just seals up against that tube.
Yeah, it's actually a bit of an angle, so it's spiked. So it'll actually spike and sits down into the water pump here. I don't know if I'm gonna put this back together today. It really looks like shit.
It's kind of corroded, yeah.
May want to do a little bit more work to this before it goes together. We'll definitely pull it apart and we'll talk about the reassembly method here anyway. These little leather guys. This leather is out of a 1960s Boeing first class section seat.
How did you come to have a Boeing first class seat?
Well, I bought an entire hide off a woman in the neighborhood that worked at Boeing in the
Ah,
60s, and she sold me the entire cowhide, and then I used most of it to reupholster a chair, and then this is like a little bits left over. Okay, so there's a few things you want to watch out for in here. Nothing scary. You just got another 10 millimeter. We should be using the Mercury standard toolkit that came with it to do all this repair, because it would be much more interesting.
Much more.
Hey, Paul, you need to get up pretty close to see better details because such a wide.
Yeah, I don't want to get
angle.
whacked with the wrench though. Get a little closer there.
Yeah, that's good.
So you're getting really close to the part that always makes me super nervous. So when you take this thing apart,
Yes,
the impeller goes one way,
it
right?
sure does.
So if you have a technique for keeping track of which way the impeller gets, needs to bend.
Yeah, this one, another way to piss off your spouse. Just to throw that out there. I got all the ways. That's why I live alone here at the house, and no one will have me. Okay. And what I'm trying to do here is, for some reason, I'm trying to keep these, which are almost identical. So this one held on the lower end, and I'm trying to keep that segregated from the ones that hold on the water pump. They may be dissimilar materials by design or something like that. They may be the same part number. I don't know, but I'm not going to risk it.
Yeah, I've never been able to rely on my photographic memory.
I was trying to take a lot of cell phone pictures, but I invariably missed the one that I needed.
Yeah.
So if you do burn up this impeller and it's real bad, you will have maybe a possibility of a problem with this housing. And then the other thing is, if it had fresh water in it from your flush or something like that over the winter time, and then it froze, if it was in your shed or basically on the back of your boat, you may see an issue with that as well. Okay, so I'm just pulling straight up here. Now this tube came out. See that whole tube? I'll pull straight up on this guy. And this is where I'm going to help Jeff out. So remember that when you put this on, you want to spin it this way, because you see how these guys are going. You see how these kind of are facing a particular direction. They kind of look like a star. And we get the new one out. Open up real quick.
Look at that, it came with new bolts. Got all kinds of goodies in here. See, this is what Jeff's talking about, is it doesn't give you a telltale of what direction those should go.
This one's not even bent.
Yep, they're not even bent.
See, they start straight. Yeah.
So we have to remember, when we put this down on the new impeller, that we want to turn this to make it seat counterclockwise. And I would take and put like a little arrow on there,
Mhm.
is what I would normally do. I didn't want that to come off yet. Okay, someone show something else. Okay. So we're gonna look at the inside of that. And that looks bomber. That looks really good. Okay, segregate our new impeller with our old impeller. Okay, these impellers are kind of an interesting one, because in here there is somewhere. Oh, it just fell in there. That will ruin your day. Is, let's see if I can pull it out. This guy, this little pin. This is the shittiest design. So this little pin here has to sit in there while you put the impeller down, and that basically fits into key. This bit here, probably black on black.
Yeah.
This bit here, which is the key that holds that from going. So if I put that together without this tiny little pin in there, which just fell down into there, this shaft would spin, but the impeller would sit there. It wouldn't actually pump any water, and then you'd have to figure out what was going on. That would be an issue.
It's messed up.
So.
Yeah, seriously.
So when you do are you gonna go reassemble it later? Because I want to ask a question here.
This actually doesn't look that horrible, but I think what I really want to do is clean this up before I put it back together, but I'm gonna put it back together with the old parts right now.
What's your trick for getting that pin to stay there?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's no groove for that pin to sit in. Whether,
It's just a flat edge.
yeah, it's just flat. There was nothing to hold it.
Here's your trick.
But
Butter. Yep. So that's your trick. I'm gonna have you fill this late. Jeff.
Sure.
Okay, so if I was doing this for real, because I really want to clean this up and I don't want to bore you guys all night, so I'm just gonna put it back together as is. Okay, so there's my pin. It's holding it in there. This guy, which way? This way or this way?
So it's
Yeah.
the blades are pointing.
So we want to go
counterclockwise.
counterclockwise. We want to go this way. It's going down. Let's see where the pin spot is. It's down the shaft. Easier without gloves.
You just saved us hours.
Days.
Okay. So we're on there in the shaft.
It's probably a good thing to check that before you lock everything up.
Yep,
Yeah.
should be good. So I got plenty of resistance against that now. So we know it's not going to be spinning on there. Should be pretty good. Get our housing back down. And I would replace everything that's in this kit. So pull this off real quick. So if we do pull off this plate, there's this plate, there's gaskets on either side on there. There's this little guy that fits down in the groove. Or if everything looks pretty good, you can just buy this part, which is just the impeller bit, which is probably all this thing really needed was the impeller bit, if that. So we come back down on our shaft.
So question,
Yep.
this one, the little fins are straight.
Yeah.
When they're bent, is that just from use and wear?
From use, yeah.
I see.
Sometimes you'll find out where they're missing.
Mhm.
like all of them, or
Mhm.
half of them, or whatever.
But this could go either way on,
Yep, that can go all the way on
but the old one, because it's already bent.
because it's already been, yeah, it's
Okay.
been seasoned, we call it.
It is important though, when, you know, when you put the new one on, that you do that clockwise twist.
Yep, you got to do the proper twist direction when you put it together.
Because if you put it in backwards, then it doesn't really work very well either. Because it's, when it goes in, it squeezes those blades. And all those blades want to be pulled through as opposed to pushed through. Does that make
I
sense?
see. So the blades will either be up against the thing like that. or like that.
Exactly, yeah. And so,
Okay.
like, you'll pull some of them apart and you'll see that like they're fixed in position, but one's going this way, one's going that way.
Uh-huh.
That means that they probably just smushed it straight down on and didn't give it that twist, so they were all going the right way.
See,
Yeah.
Wasn't exactly designed for maintainability, was it?
I don't know. This is you know, the part that always drives me crazy. You know, trying to get them until the end night, remembering, you know, which way it's supposed to go. I like the arrow, like even a pencil, just like a pencil arrow would be good.
The Russians lost one of their rocket launches with like hundreds of millions of dollars worth of satellites, plus the cost of the rocket, because the technicians installed the sensors upside down. So that the attitude measurement system got confused and
Where are they working now?
Yeah,
they had to hammer it in to make it fit that way.
probably. Dan, do you ever get nervous using that tool? Like you're gonna over torque it?
Tool's my friend, but,
Yeah,
yeah. But I gave that like 0 clicker torque. I
yeah.
was just like,
Yeah.
too many
So
threads.
you're just using that till it barely,
Yeah,
you know.
and I wouldn't have used that if you guys weren't here because I'm trying to go a little bit faster for everybody here. So yeah, so I'm gonna pull this back apart and get all this cleaned up and, you know, maybe put a little bit of coating in there or something like that, just to make it a little bit nicer, but just for today's purposes.
So the paint's gone, right?
Yeah, the paint's pretty much gone. I may try to touch up with something there. This motor may be hitting the for sale sign. The interesting thing, I bought this engine new. The engine itself, I think, was $1,700. And then just the kit for the stainless steel bits to remove the tiller and put controls in the cockpit was $1,700. So just like a hand, it was like,
Yeah.
it was like a handful of like nuts, bolts, and bent stainless bits. And I was like, oh my God, so expensive. Okay, for this, you definitely want to get some grease on this shaft, make it a little bit easier to get in. This is a surface you really don't want to put grease on. Maybe a little bit of anti-seize on here, just so that it pulls out of the unit, but these units pull apart pretty easy. Then you really don't need much on that rubber bit there. So this is the fun part where you get to sneak 3 things back together. I'm going to
Something was falling off there.
You want me to hold the line again?
Let's get it up in there too.
We're trying to get this little bit that we saw poking out here back in that hole.
This is the fiddly bit.
Yeah,
Yeah, seems like not a lot of fun.
yes, how easy is this, guys? You do it yourself.
Do it yourself.
You do it yourself.
I think the nut may have come all the way off.
It looks like it's over the side maybe.
You can do it a lot easier if you have luck.
Yeah, thanks.
Very loudly. Are you able to see it sufficiently, or do you just have to feel around?
Kind of got to feel around.
Some motors are a little different, like on mine, the shaft goes all the way through and the connection actually is out here exposed.
Like it should be.
This one's a little more complicated, yeah.
Let's see that.
Still shifted in the right spot.
Yeah. I think so. After there.
It's better from this side.
You had to twist the prop. Not there yet.
I think it's there. Yeah.
Sometimes the splines don't line up inside the engine, and if you turn the prop, that might help sometimes. Just turn a
There's
little
the
bit.
ship right there. On Mercury.
This is where the patience part comes in.
Yeah. For the fire sale. It's not.
Yes, maybe a bit.
Not quite, I'm watching.
It's the ship. I'm trying to get the ship up to the upper bit there. Shaft is right. Let's see, come through here.
What brand do you have, Jeff?
Oh, I see. I mean, they're all a little different.
Honestly, I want to take this apart tomorrow, so if I want to do this.
Keep going, Dan. It's not on these, right?
No, it's not.
If the audience has a general idea.
You can do it up here to guide it.
It doesn't look like it. It's rubber.
Yeah.
Too bad. The funny thing is that sounds metallic as opposed to here, like dead rubber. So it must be dead ending. Housing.
It's dead in here. It's on the housing one.
It's the shift lever that's,
Yeah, it's this. It's getting this rod
yeah.
here to go through a pinhole up there, which they should have had like a little access port or something for.
Yeah. Is all that bending normal? Yeah.
Yeah, that's by design. Just going from the center
Yeah.
shaft to then hook to this plate.
Because I want to pull this apart tomorrow, I don't want to put it back together.
Dude.
The conclusion of it. Yeah,
Thank you, Dan.
yeah, so that's how you pull apart bottom end, and then you have a torn apart engine in your garage.
Yeah. That's all I do. When that happens.
Yeah, that's all that is. All right.
Seem easy. And you just save yourself like $600. Yeah, you take.
Yeah.
$600, $900.
There's probably a trick to do it, whether you put a guide down there or something like that to get it to pop out of that hole, but it's not that big of an issue. I think if he sat there and fiddled with it for a while, and it could be that it's jacked up on the stand. If we actually put it down, it may just center itself.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's probably just doing one of these and not doing it just due to the gravitational pull of the moon.
Had a webcam on my tablet computer and stuck it in there. From the Yamaha.
What was that?
Whoever's online, we didn't quite catch that.
Oh, I have a little board cam, little camera on cable for my tablet computer, and I was doing the 9/9s. It ended up sticking it up there to look and see where things weren't fitting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
did the same damn 9/9s and just made me crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, imagine if you put it this way and then try to suck it up, it would probably be a little bit easier or something, but yeah, and then that's pretty much all I had for today.
Thanks.
This thing needs a bunch of work. So great.
Can I ask you a specific question?
Sure.
I'll show you a picture. So this is my motor. I just noticed this the other day. I took the cowling off because I had a leaking water hose in there, but I noticed this bolt head is corroded like crazy. None of the others are.
Mm-hmm.
And my guess is that the previous mechanic who worked on the motor for me dropped the bolt and put the wrong bolt in there. That's the only thing I can think of why that one in particular would be all corroded.
Yeah,
See, that one's perfectly fine. It's probably supposed to be like that.
yeah, I would think that maybe this one through some sort of with the electrical going through there and the current or something may have done something, but I wouldn't
Yeah.
think that
So
to
this-
me is probably the wrong.
Anyway, I could probably just,
Like this one's all corroded, this one's perfectly fine. So I mean, I run into that online too. It doesn't really seem to have a rhyme or reason. Like,
I was thinking I could probably just pull that bolt and replace it. The one bolt without even taking the carburetor off.
or clean, right?
Yeah, but clean it and recoat it with something
Yeah, okay.
and put a little anti-seize in there before you put the threads back together. That'd be good.
All right, I've got a question. We didn't do anything special to ours. I didn't know to deal with the impeller water. So if we were going to leave it outside in the dry moorage all winter, maybe a shop vac to try and pull the water out of there.
Down in the, I think if you leave it in the down position, it's a little bit better.
Yeah.
Than if you pick it up.
Yep.
So if you're down, you're okay.
And run it out of the water
Um,
or no?
That's a great question. I don't think it really matters. If you run it out of water, I think that's fine. It's probably
I've
good.
stored dozens of outboards outside without freeze protection. I've never seen one for a freeze.
It doesn't
They
get
drain,
really clear for periods of time, yeah. It's pretty
They're
uncommon,
made to drain. They're made to drain.
yeah. It's a good point though, like, when we talked about the fuel coming up to carburetor, the best way to store the motor is to pull a fuel hose and let it run out of water.
Yep.
Not
Run out of fuel.
run out of fuel, not out of water.
I've asked all kinds of people and I always get different answers. Equal number, that's a good idea and that's a bad idea.
I'm for it.
Okay, I'll do it.
Less for it on a two-stroke, but not that against it either.
On the two-stroke, you're going to lose lubricant when you lose gas. So don't rev it up. Just do it at an idle, and it will by itself as it drains out. The speed of the motor will go up because you're running a little rich when it's starved for fuel. It seems, or lean. I'm sorry, not rich.
Yeah.
But low idle when you're running the fuel out of the motor. You know,
Yeah.
I've got a 50-year-old two-stroke, and I do that every time, all the time, and it's fine.
I will do that. Let's start doing it again. I was doing it and then someone said, oh, no, don't do that. And someone said, oh, do it. The consensus seems to be do it, so I will.
Okay, so Dan, I got some questions for you. These were like super stressful situations for me when I
Okay.
was doing this. Okay. You're out and the motor won't run fast. It'll just idle. So you're out in the middle of nowhere. You can't go fast enough to get you to buck the wind, and it won't do any more than idle. You twist the throttle and it does. Start it, it runs fine. Twist the throttle and it does.
Mhm.
What do you think that is?
It's a clogged jet.
Okay.
Is that what it was?
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm not testing them. Okay, now, because it took me forever to figure out what was going on. And then I realized just
It
like
goes
you
back,
did.
it goes back to this guy a little bit here. Where this one is kind of interesting. So you have 3 jets. You have an idle jet, a mid jet, and a high jet. And this carburetor is very similar to this as a side draft, where this is a little bit different. So this has a little, it's missing. So there's a little piston that pulls up in here, and it has little orifices going down on here. So as that piston gets pulled up by the throttle cable, this piston moves up and it starts to pull from different jets. So you're pulling from an idle jet when it's all the way down. As you start to pull the cable, you go through the mid jet and the idle jet, and then it goes all the way up, you go through the main jet.
So the moral of the story is at idle, it's only pulling out through the idle jet. And then when you twist off the throttle, it's no longer pulling from the idle jet, and the clog is in the high speed,
Yeah.
and therefore you're not getting any gas. Okay.
Yeah.
And then conversely, because it can happen the other way, right? It'll idle,
It won't idle.
or I mean, sorry, no, so won't idle, or you have a wide open, started wide open, and you get it to run wide open, but every time you throttle down, it won't have that.
Yeah.
It's the same problem, different jet, right?
A different orifice. It could be a jet, or it could just be a set
Yeah.
thing in there.
Yeah.
I have that problem where it won't idle, so it'll run if you want to give it throttle, but it won't idle, and so you can't change gears.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, right.
And having it happen in the marina, it's like,
Yeah.
It's very stressful.
It happened to my son last year. He was bringing the boat underneath the bow bridge. Yeah, he was, yeah, were you there? You were there?
I was there.
Right. So he's trying to bring it under the bridge, coming up the bridge, he's waiting. And he can't- yeah, right. And the bridge goes up and the engine dies. It comes down.
Rich goes up, he did not.
Third time, he just left it wide open. He was doing, he's like. But so, all it took, was pull the carb apart, poke out, get the surfaces clear. And it was all.
yeah.
If you got one that's really just doing that, and it's carburation, right? Because you got this weird runability where it's either not letting you get as low RPM or it's not letting you get as high. It's one or the other, sometimes both. It's to totally disassemble that thing and put in that ultrasonic cleaner and clean all those little
Yeah.
orifices in there. Because if you look at the way that these are constructed, like here, Paul, this is a hole that was drilled through and then they plugged it at the end. So this is coming up around here. So there's something happening going around this corner. And that's, it's potentially where you're going to get a blockage as well, not just the jets. It can be the whole thing. So really getting in there and doing an ultrasonic clean on that is going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So I was taking a guy out through the locks and we got hung up waiting for the lock to fill for an hour. Went to go into the locks and one of my engines stopped. I got a Cat with 299s on it, 2 Yamahas. And one of them started idling totally crappy. And it turned out, so we bagged the trip. It was horrible. It was one of those smoky days. It was a disaster. Turned out the idle screw had backed out.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
And that hasn't happened to me since the first 9.9 I had on the first catamaran 4 years ago or something.
I'd consider anti-seize on the idle screw.
Well, stuff like this guy
Loctite.
here, This is the idle screw, and this has a little spring behind it. I'll articulate this so you can see. So this screw here goes through this head and it goes against this surface. And then by adjusting this in, it increases the amount of idle. So it's opening up the butterfly in here, allowing more in. So like this guy, if these springs can go bad, they can crack. The other thing you can do is take some of just like RTV, like rubber gasket maker, and just smear it on there. And it'll keep
Right.
things from vibrating apart, opposing to needing
Loctite
a
or-
Loctite. Because if you Loctite this,
Yeah.
this is plastic.
Yeah.
So it's really not going to do that much between this and that anyway, because with the Loctite, it's really for similar metals. So I don't know, a better way to go with that would be anything that vibrates, like trying to think of what we had. I can't remember which engine it was. It was a salt flat racer, and everything had just gobs of RTV on it everywhere, on every single bolt surface to keep it from vibrating loose.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Right, what else has happened, Jeff?
That was,
Yeah, I've been,
Nothing. Too messy, too easy, so, no.
I see your block here. I assume that's to deal with the pulling upwards.
Yeah. So that's a good point. Is my transom's here, so I can't really pull out. So it's got a block
there.
Block. It's in gear right now, so it's in gear. The block in there allows you to pull straight up on it, and then need a quick disconnect to get it through the cowl to get the hood back on.
Yeah. I was also admiring your engine hours counter. I didn't know those existed.
Oh yeah,
I mean, I knew you could get them, but I didn't know it was like a little glue-on thing like that.
yeah. We didn't talk about these. So this is made by Redline, and you can buy these. I find them mostly easy to find them on eBay, and they're brand new in the box. They just have a tiny little battery in them that lasts for years, and they're super easy. So these are self-adhesive on the back. It has one wire that comes down and just wraps around near the plug wire right here.
Induction.
And that's induction. It's picking up everything off of this, and it will give you engine RPMs. You can set the codes on it to give you the amount of hours you've run total, the amount of hours you've run since you last reset it. Gives you RPM if you wanted to mount this like all the way in your cockpit, which would be stupid. But it is really good for maintenance to know how many hours you've run. And that brings us back to this chart too, which we don't really talk about. With my chalkboard.
Nice. That is awesome. The glare is a little bit there.
Yeah. And you say what? We're talking about plugs, oil, fuel, water pump, anodes. I look at, different things that I may do every 3 months. If I'm really running the boat hard, that would be like multiple trips to the island, something like that, maybe every 3 months. I think of a season is probably more like 100 hours. So if you're running about 100 hours in 3 months, you would do these things. If you're not running 100 hours, the reason why I'm getting 100 hours, I do a lot of troll fishing on my sailboat as well. So there's quite a bit of hours of just out there trolling all day long for 8 or 9 hours. But we look at a season as 100 hours and looking at those things, but tracking that 100 hours is really simple through just one of those little things. And they're like maybe $20. Thanks. And I put it on all my outboards, and they kind of live with them. And then you can show someone that like, hey, this really only has, 10,000 hours on it. So it should still be good. Yeah, like you say, it's probably not.
2 of those would be great for me because I have to sync the 2 outboards. Get
Oh, yeah, with the RPMs, those would be awesome.
that would be cool. So what are they called? What are they?
I heard red line.
Here you go. Let's scroll into that hard line.
Yep.
Power meter from Redline. What was the
Hard line, actually.
Hard line.
Okay, I gotta check that out. That would be very cool.
It says track service for oil, spark plugs, rings, and valves, which we're not going to do. Yeah, it's really super simple. They work on 2 strokes, 4 strokes. You can change the amount of sparkies you're getting per, or it's based on spark, so that's going to give you RPMs anyway in your hour meter. So Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna look into that. That'd be,
There's the back side if you want to go. If you have a pin, the model number is HR 8067 2.
what was, hang on a sec, let me get some light on in here and write that down.
Thank you. It'll be fun right around for that for 2 weeks.
What was that again? HR,
The other thing you need to do this is you need a
HR 80672.
That's correct. Yep.
Not.
need it.
Somebody wants to toss it in chat, that would be great.
Yeah.
Pull the carb off, go to the dock, lay out a, air towel ready. And you do it on the dock.
Did we stop recording?
We're still recording.
People need to motor it on.
Online, do we have any more questions at this point? It's almost 9
Yes.
o'clock.
I've been running a couple of Yamaha 99 high thrust on my primer gun, and every one I've had, there's been an issue there. It's their electric start, and it says if the electric start fails, you take off the timing belt cover, wrap a line around the top of the flywheel, and use out of the pull start. The thing is that from the 80s up until probably close to 2010, Yamaha never quite figured out if you put an aluminum pin through an aluminum housing and it seizes, it's going to break off. You can't put any torque on to pull it out. So to actually take this timing belt cover off, you're supposed to pull out this pin and undo a knob. Well, the pins always seize. I've never had one where that, I used one where that pin actually comes out without breaking off.
Yeah.
I've had 6 of them. I've never had a trouble with it, but
And also, how often do you have to change the timing belts in those? How many hours do those last?
It's probably the timing belt and they're talking about a bigger engine, right?
Electric. I don't know if it's a timing belt. It's a cog belt. Are you talking about the cog belt?
Right. Yeah, it is a timing belt, basically. It's a 4-stroke.
Yeah. So the timing happens inside the stator, inside
but
here, where you wrap it around, and then that cog belt, I think, is going to. Does it go to the starter and something else, right?
It goes to the camshaft. There's an overhead cam.
Oh, it goes to the camshaft on that one, and then it's got the thing where you have to wrap the rope around it and pull it type thing.
Yeah, because the Yamaha never gave you the option of having both, because their pull start is geared to the flywheel the same way as their electric start. It's not like some others where the pull start actually grabs the top of the flywheel.
I think my Yamaha 9.9 has an electric start and it's got a pull start too. You don't have to wrap.
Some of the newer ones might do that, but the older ones, which are in my price range, don't.
Yeah, I don't know what you would say about the hours, but I would say for a cog belt like that, I would give it 5 years of life in that environment. So
then you have to destroy the timing belt cover to get it off because the pin won't come out.
Drill the pin out. I mean, that's always a pain, but.
Yeah. And what's it? The timing cover is like an ABS plastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is, there's an aluminum bracket that comes up.
Yeah.
With a hole through it, and they moved an aluminum. They might have been concerned about dissimilar metal corrosion, but if they just put a nylon sleeve in and a stainless pin, it'd be easy to take apart. But the aluminum pins always corrode in there, and any amount of torque is going to break the end off.
Yeah, I would drill it out and then sleeve it.
Yeah, you're trying to drill through the existing cover and everything. There's a lot of plastic you're trying to line up and drill through before you get to the metal, because the faceplate, which has the start switch and a couple of other electrics on it, also is held in place by the same pin.
But the pin is not a critical tolerance. Like, you have a few millimeters either direction you can go on that, correct? I mean, it's just holding the cover on.
yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
It becomes one piece with the bracket. That's the metal bracket that comes up from the block and holds it in place.
I'd get it after it with a drill. That's not,
Not sure there's any other option really.
yeah, and just fix their engineering error.
Right, but then if your electric start quips or your battery's dead, and you're trying to do that out in the middle of the chuck, hang off your. spur.
Yeah, it's gotta be, it should be fixed in advance. I mean, yeah, for sure.
I mean, I don't know why they had that same design for about 25 years.
I want to think that my high thrust white 9.9 had one just like it, I think.
Yeah, and the next models, those were in the 80s. The gray
Yeah.
ones that came up in the 90s up until the end of the early 2000s had the same system.
I've been running the same 6GC type motors, Yamaha 99s for the last two boats. That's my kid's 24, so it's about 24 years. And I think I've gone through 5 of them. I broke one when the control cables broke, and the 2 I bought on this boat, the legs corroded.
Hmm.
But the big problem I've had with them more than anything else is that every time I think they change the amount of ethanol in the gasoline, the idle jet clogged. Kind of sort of like an annual or biannual event. I end up.
It's pretty standard. Yep.
Yeah, I carry around 5 gallons of gas loaded up with Chevron Techron, and I idle that through it. That seems to clean it out.
Do you run it out of gas before you park it?
No, because they sit in wells in the back of the boat.
Oh, you don't have any way to shut the fuel supply off.
Not really. I have to disconnect the hoses.
Good idea.
That,
Yeah,
you know, it's a 36 foot.
I would add in some way to shut the fuel off to them and just run them out of fuel. I mean, that's going to be a one-time project opposing to a seasonal project of rebuilding carburetors.
Yeah. Well, I rarely rebuild them. I end up running. I carry a spare gas tank with all the Chevron in it, and a double dose, and idle it through, and that seems to clean them out. But the problem is you get situations where your idling is so bad and you don't have time to do that. But yeah, the shut off is a good idea.
Carburetor out, clean the carburetor, put the carburetor back in.
Buy ethanol-free gas, and I think most marinas, they're ethanol-free. They and some of them you ask, you want lead or ethanol-free.
I have noticed my Tohatsu, even though I do run only ethanol free in it, I still have to clean out the jets like every 2 years. I don't know why that is. It just, maybe the orifices are really super teeny. I don't know.
Mine gets fed from the fuel docks, so mostly shill shoal, which is mostly ethanol free.
Yeah. Well, I make sure I run the gas out of my engines every time, unless it's just going to be a day or two.
Well, I gotta go. I will see you guys later. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Yep,
Good
I
to see
think
you.
we're wrapping up here as well. We're out
Yeah, I
of
think
questions
we're-
online and people have left. Diane says, thank you very much, Dan, and thank you, Paul, for good camera work.